Welcome to Evidence Mastery. Today, we're diving into a masterclass in scientific discipline from Dr. Massoud Toussi's book, Real-World Evidence, Principles and Practice. We're going to walk through the entire 5-stage life cycle of a real-world evidence study. It's all about how we turn messy, everyday data into evidence we can actually trust to make big decisions. So, let's get right into it.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with what is, without a doubt, the most critical piece of the puzzle: crafting the right question. From there, we'll see how that question gets translated into a rock-solid protocol. Then it's all about getting the data, running the numbers, and finally, maybe the hardest part, figuring out what it all means. Each step builds on the last, and as you'll see, one weak link can jeopardize the whole thing.
So why all this fuss about process? Well, think about it. We all know about randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, the gold standard, right? They happen in this super-controlled, almost sterile environment. But RWE studies? Man, they live out in the wild, in the messy, chaotic, unpredictable reality of everyday healthcare. And because of that chaos, we actually need an even more rigorous, disciplined process to get to a reliable answer. And that process is exactly what we're about to explore.
And that entire process, everything we're about to discuss, it all hinges on this first step, crafting the research question. It sounds simple, but let me tell you, if you get this part wrong, your entire study is built on quicksand. No amount of fancy statistics later on can save a poorly formulated question.
So how do you avoid that quicksand? Use frameworks. Think of a framework like PICO as the architectural blueprint for structuring your question. Who are the patients? What's the treatment? What's the outcome? And so on. But just because a question is well structured doesn't mean it's a good one. That's where a framework like FINER comes in. It's the reality check. It forces you to ask, is this even doable? Is it interesting? Is it actually relevant to anyone? It's a crucial filter to apply before you go any further.
Okay, once the question is set, you have to define exactly what it is you plan to measure. This is called the Estimand. The best way to think about it is like a contract you sign with yourself before you ever see the data. It locks in the precise treatment effect you're going for, and it stops that very human temptation to move the goalposts or reinterpret things after you see the results. It's a powerful weapon against bias.
And this table is a perfect example of that in action. We're not just asking, which diabetes drug is better. The Estimand makes us get super specific. Which drugs, in which patients, measuring what exact variable. And check this out. It even pre-specifies how you're going to handle things like patients who stop taking the drug. Every single detail is locked in, leaving zero room for ambiguity later.
Okay, this next concept is a real game changer. It's called Target Trial Emulation, or TTE. The reality is, we just can't run a full-blown RCT for every single question out there. TTE gives us a framework to do the next best thing. We design our observational study to emulate or mimic the ideal trial we wish we could run. It's how we inject the rigor of a trial into the reality of observational data.
And it works by forcing you to answer the exact same questions a trial designer would. Who gets into the study? That's your eligibility criteria. When does the clock start ticking for each person? That's time zero, and it's so critical for avoiding common biases. What exactly is the treatment we're studying? When do we measure the outcome? By systematically mapping out this logic, you bring an incredible amount of clarity and discipline to your study.
So, with a razor-sharp question in hand, we move on to stage 2, developing the study protocol. If the question is the big idea, the protocol is the operational blueprint. It's the document that turns our abstract concept into a concrete step-by-step plan for how we're actually going to do this thing.
A strong protocol is, it's obsessively detailed. It lays out everything. But probably the most important part of a modern protocol is that pre-specified analytic plan. This means you decide exactly how you're going to analyze the data before you even look at it. This commitment to transparency is absolutely fundamental for science that other people can trust and reproduce.
And what's really cool is that the field is creating standards to make this much easier. You can use templates like HARPER, which is all about making sure another scientist could reproduce your study perfectly. Or you could use something like RWE, which focuses on documenting every single decision you made during the study with total transparency. These aren't just documents, they're tools for building trust in the final evidence.
And this kind of transparency, it's not just a friendly suggestion anymore. More and more, regulatory bodies like the FDA and the EMA require these protocols to be publicly registered before the study even starts. It's a really simple step, but it's a powerful defense against things like cherry-picking favorable results, and it's crucial for building public trust.
All right, so we've got the question and we've got the plan. Now it's time to get our hands dirty with the data. Stage 3, data extraction, is so much more than just running a query. It's this intricate process of translating the messy, complex reality of a patient's journey into clean, structured variables that a computer can actually understand and analyze.
And this is done in 3 really rigorous phases. First, you get the clinical experts to map out the concept. What does new-onset diabetes actually look like in the raw data? Second, that clinical knowledge gets operationalized. It gets turned into a computer algorithm. And finally, you have to validate that algorithm against a gold standard, like having a human expert review the charts to prove that it's actually finding what you think it's finding.
Of course, not all data is created equal. You might have access to a massive insurance claims dataset, which is amazing for scale, but often lacks deep clinical detail. Or you could have rich clinical data from electronic health records, but that can sometimes be fragmented and messy. Understanding these trade-offs is a critical part of designing a credible study. Now, the exciting part is that we're moving beyond these isolated datasets. There are huge international initiatives creating what are called common data models. This means hospitals and health systems all over the world can structure their data in the same way. This lets us run these massive privacy-preserving studies across a global network, giving us statistical power we could only dream of a decade ago. So we have our question, our plan, and our clean data. Now it's time for stage 4, analysis. This is where the magic happens, but let's be honest, it's also a minefield. If you get the analysis wrong, you can introduce biases that could completely invalidate your results. To navigate this minefield, we have a pretty sophisticated statistical toolkit. Methods like propensity scores can help us create treatment and control groups that are much more balanced and comparable. And there are some incredibly clever approaches like self-controlled designs, where each patient essentially acts as their own control. That's a really powerful way to eliminate bias from things that don't change over time, like someone's genetics.
Now, this is one of the coolest techniques in modern RWE, and it's a fantastic way to build confidence in your results. You run a negative control. You test for a link you know is impossible. If your study finds one, then you know your methods are biased somehow. You also run a positive control. You test for a link you know is real. If you don't find it, you know you have a problem with your data. It's a brilliant, built-in reality check for your study.
And that brings us to the final, and you could argue the most important stage, interpreting the evidence. All the work we've done so far is basically meaningless if we can't translate our statistical findings into clear, contextualized insights that can actually help people make better decisions.
One of the biggest criticisms you'll always hear about RWE is the unmeasured confounder, that unknown factor that might be secretly driving your result. The e-value is a really elegant tool to address this head-on. It basically calculates how powerful an unmeasured factor would have to be to completely erase your finding. It's a way of stress testing your result and being totally transparent about its potential vulnerabilities.
To bring it all together, the book offers this fantastic mnemonic, CAUTION. It's like a final checklist you run through before you make any big claims. Have you really assessed your confounders? Is your algorithm valid? Have you quantified your uncertainty? It's a framework for disciplined thinking that helps you move from just a statistical result to a credible, real-world conclusion. When you step back and look at this entire life cycle, it really boils down to these 3 pillars: rigor in your methods, transparency in your process, and a healthy dose of humility in your interpretation. Mastering these is how we transform messy, real-world data into evidence that can genuinely improve people's lives.
We've just flown through a very deep and complex process, and really, we've only just scratched the surface. To truly master these concepts, I highly recommend you dive into the source material, Real-World Evidence, Principles and Practice by Dr. Massoud Toussi. You can find it on Amazon.com. Thanks for joining us.